Colonel Adams, across the country there's some talk these days of possibly legalizing marijuana, even hard drugs. What do you think about that?
Well, I think it's pure silliness. I think that if you look at the harmful effects of the utilization of marijuana, cocaine, heroin, you can come to only one conclusion, and that is that they should not be legalized, and they should also have every effort made possible to exterminate the use of them and try to deal with trafficking in those illegal drugs.
So says Colonel Jim Adams, Director of the Texas Department of Public Safety, who will talk to us now on Capital I.
From Austin, this is Winston Bode's Capital I, Texas' longest-running press encounter program. Now, here's your host and the originator of Capital I, Winston Bode.
Colonel Adams, I guess your work would be a lot easier, the work of the department, if you didn't have to deal with drug trafficking. How are you doing in your war on drugs?
Well, we're making a lot of progress, but at the same time, we're dealing primarily with the tip of the iceberg. Last year in Texas, for instance, we seized the Department of Public Safety in conjunction with other agencies, federal, state, or local, seized about $360 million in contraband drugs. Yet at the same time, on the streets of Texas, we're seeing greater availability of these drugs, as evidenced by the fact that the price is lower and the purity is higher. So we're making more seizures, but at the same time, we're having more drugs thrown at us by those trafficking in drugs.
Well, the point that some people make, and it was even brought up on ABC's 2020 the other night, the point that some people make is that the tail is sort of wagging the dog in this country, that drugs, in a way, seem to be taking over, and that the drug traffic involves, as you indicate, tremendous amounts of money, which can be used in corrupting officials and so on. And the suggestion is, and I want to get your more detailed response to this, the suggestion is that the way possibly to cope with that is to take drugs out of the underground market and make them legal, and presumably somehow cut out this enormous money exchange.
Well, what you're doing, you're looking at it from a very narrow perspective. You're saying, how can we solve the law enforcement problem? Well, you could solve the law enforcement problem by legalizing drugs. But what you're doing is overlooking the social impact of legalizing the use of these drugs. And you'd be flying in the face of all the medical evidence which has been accumulated as to the harmful effects. You know, every day you pick up the paper, you see some terrible case. Look at Belushi. I feel like I was robbed when he died of a drug overdose. I thought he was one of the best comedians available. Then you read the other day where one of the young ladies on one of the on Love Boat, for instance, that she actually lost her job as a result of becoming dependent on drugs. She could not handle the stress and could not handle her work as a result of her drug problems.
You know, along that line, we've lost a major actor for the time being, Stacy Keach. He's in prison in England on cocaine charges.
And I was sort of encouraged by his reaction to his incarceration, and that is that after he gets out, and I think he had about 9 months to do for trying to smuggle in some cocaine, small amounts, users only, that he intends to really get out and speak and try to address the problems associated with using drugs. So
he can be an eloquent spokesman on that.
Oh, he can, and anyone can who's been through the problem. And when you look at parents today and get the calls I get, and I think every public official dealing with the problem, from parents whose children's lives have been ruined by the use of drugs, there's no question but that you just can't legalize it. Look at
You're assuming that if they became legal, that people would go ape in using them?
Oh, absolutely. Because look at Iran. Remember when they took the hostages in Iran? This country could not even find the government over there to deal with them. Iran has the just a rampant heroin problem. Look at England today. It's become a major problem, the use of drugs. That was a country that experimented with legalizing heroin. And as a result, now they have a major problem with their teenagers on utilizing heroin. So it's not a question of just the law enforcement aspect. It's really the harmful effects of the utilization of these drugs.
Well, let's turn back to law enforcement, though, which is your job. I was interested in an item in the newspaper the other day about what you're having to cope with. The item referred to the fact that DPS was involved in the seizure of a plane in South Texas that turned out to have $5.8 million in cash on board. And you said at that time that amounted to some 600 pounds in small bills. That $508 million compared to your whole budget for narcotics activity, $8 million.
That's correct. And that's what we're finding is that we're outmanned, outgunned, out-resourced, and we're trying to deal with a major problem with an inadequate response. This is one reason Governor White has been speaking out so vociferously in demanding greater federal participation, because if the drugs were destroyed overseas, which is part of the responsibility of the State Department and Drug Enforcement Administration, we would not have a problem with cocaine or heroin. Secondly, if it came to these shores and was interdicted by Customs, which has a responsibility to keep contraband substances out of the United States, we wouldn't have a problem in Texas with those two drugs. So what he's asking for is actually a war on drugs as a result of the military, greater participation by the military to stop these planes that are flying in across the Mexican border, some of them direct from Colombia, that are violating our airspace and transporting these illegal drugs every day.
Does it occur to you that the Texas National Guard, for instance, could be utilized in that fashion too?
Well, the National Guard really doesn't have the type of equipment used to interdict these flights. It needs a special type of radar to pursue the drug trafficking aircraft. We think that the National Guard can and is being used more in the eradication of marijuana in the state of Texas, where it's grown domestically.
But generally speaking, the military across the country might be better used in helping in such matters.
Well, we consider it a threat to national security. If you can have hundreds or thousands of flights every day coming into Texas from out of this country, they could just as well be carrying terrorists. They could just as well be carrying saboteurs. It is a threat to national security when you cannot intercept illegal flights coming into the United States. So it's not
could go beyond drugs.
Oh, it could.
Well, what about the priorities in a state such as Texas, which spent last year perhaps $20 million on picking up litter? Again, your budget for narcotics activity was $8 million. What about priorities there?
Well, I think that law and order, your criminal law enforcement, you go back to the Texas Constitution and the United States Constitution, one of the primary purposes is to preserve order. And so law enforcement should be a top priority. But over the years, our resources have not kept up with the demands placed upon us, not only in drug trafficking, where, as you mentioned, we have an $8 million budget each year for the state narcotics effort.
And we should,
and yet we
part of your budget. You have,
that's just
what's
part.
your total budget?
Our total budget's $153 million.
Go ahead.
But $8 million for drug trafficking compared to $20 million a year spent for picking up litter alongside the highways.
This is a hard question, Jim, and I know you're not a teacher, you're not a philosopher, but just for a moment, respond to this question. The problem, the drug problem, really stems in the end from the consumers, does it not?
Absolutely.
The consumers want the drugs. Now, what do we do about that?
Well, that's why in Texas we've been a leader among states in trying to address what the real problem is.
What is the real problem?
The real problem is the consumer demand for drugs, and that can only be addressed ultimately to final solutions through education and prevention activities. Law enforcement will just deal with the tip of the iceberg, yet we have to educate not only our youth, because it's no longer young people using marijuana in high school, it's cocaine, it's young business professionals utilizing cocaine regularly. The average profile of a cocaine addict today is a young business person about 30 years of age, who spends about $30,000 a year on their cocaine habits. Those are the people that we need to educate on the harmful
And you're
effects.
saying that it's not just a matter of lifestyle choices, that maybe we're being a little fussy about this, that it's everyone's right to get stoned in the evening or any time he wants to. What about that kind of thinking?
Well, I have no problem with saying that you can prohibit something that interferes with an individual's decision as to how he's going to use his body, because in these cases, we're spending huge sums of money in our state hospitals dealing with the mindless individuals who've destroyed their minds through use of PCP and all of the LSD, some of these other hallucinogenic type drugs. It becomes a state problem dealing with it. It's just like traffic safety. The use of marijuana, one marijuana cigarette impairs your driving ability. I'm threatened when I'm on the highway by individuals who are using marijuana.
And apparently a lot of people do mix alcohol and other drugs.
Oh, today the use of drugs is one of the major problems has been the mixture of drugs. In California recently, they did a survey of about 500 drivers aged 18 to 24. And they found that in the fatal accidents involving those drivers, about 80% of the drivers were under some type of a drug. 70%.
How could they tell?
Through autopsy. 70% were under the influence or had alcohol in their system. About 30% had cocaine, and then or marijuana, and 11% had cocaine. And in many of the cases, they had a mixture of these drugs, as disclosed by the autopsy.
Excuse me one moment, Colonel Adams. We're talking to Colonel Jim Adams, Director of the Texas Department of Public Safety. I'm Winston Bode. This is Capital I. About this time each week, we thank people who help us stay on the air. We'd like to thank this week two regular patrons of Capital I, H&R Block, the income tax people, with offices all over Texas, very busy right now, and also Hastings Humans, Hastings Telephone Answering Service, Austin Paging Service, home of Hastings Humans. If you call and Bode isn't in, Hastings is. We've used them for years. And we'd also like to give you our address in case you need to contact us on any subject. We thank you for the letters that you've been writing on various subjects that we've been doing lately, seat belts, alcoholism, and so on. Write us if you have a thought or a suggestion for a program. Our address is Capital I, Brown Building, Austin, Texas, 78701. And you can call us if you like. Like I say, we have an answering service. If we're not in, we'll get your message. 472-9837 is our number. Let me turn very quickly, before returning to Colonel Adams, to our producer's notebook for a couple of quick comments. On the cultural front, we're very happy to report that famous Count Basie band, dear to the hearts of many of us. You like Count Basie?
Oh, yes.
Ah, yes. Is strong these days. We caught the band the other night at Austin's Bozo's Club, and if you don't know where that is, it is where Texas Money used to be on 6th Street. We found the new leader of the band, Thad Smith, running a ship that is very, very tight. Catch them wherever and as often as you can. In broadcasting, we'd like to say that in our opinion, something fresh is happening in a new ABC Private Eye series called Moonlighting. The mythic face of Sybil Shepherd does better than you'd expect. But the news is Bruce Willis, who creates a breezy, fast-talking all-American character who has a lot of the ingredients which made audiences take to Cary Grant's Clark Gable. Finally, up on Austin's Capitol Hill, nobody is talking much about it openly, and correct us if we're wrong, but observers keep wondering how the lawmakers are going to get out of town without at least having a fight over some sort of new Texas bill. Now back to Colonel Adams. We're talking about driving. We're talking about alcohol. At this time, there's some bills up there on Capitol Hill dealing with alcohol, such as the open container bill. How do you feel about that?
Well, I was chairman of a task force on traffic safety that started in 1982. It was made up of a very broad-based group of representatives, and we came up with a number of recommendations, most of which were passed during the 1983 legislative session. Some of the bills that did not make it through have been subsequently passed, like the child car seat requirement. The open container is up this time. for raising the drinking age to 21.
You might double back and tell us what did get on the books and how that's working as far as DWI legislation.
Some of the main legislation was eliminating deferred adjudication and making probation a final conviction for enhancement purposes. Also making point 10 per se intoxication rather than a presumption, and the refusal to take the breath test, providing for an administrative suspension of the driver's license. We feel these bills have all helped to bring about the decline in our fatality rate. In 1982, we had 430 fewer fatalities than in 1981, and in 1983, we had 448 fewer in 1982. Last year, we had a decline in the mileage death rate of about 3%, so we're...
Might define that a little bit.
Well, the mileage death rate is the number of fatalities per 100 million miles driven, and that dropped from 3.0 to 2.9, which is a 3% decline. So what we feel has happened as a result of a greater awareness over the problems of driving while intoxicated and some of the other measures that were dealt with, we've seen a savings of almost 2,000 lives since 1981.
Okay, why are you in favor of open container law?
Well, one of the beliefs we had on our task force was that in addition to these punitive measures, we felt that, for one, drinking and driving is dumb, and if the legislature would put an official condemnation on drinking and driving, that most people, being law-abiding, would stop driving and drinking.
Some people say that's a false assumption that most people are law-abiding.
Well, I differ.
When it comes to things like that.
I differ
they
with
think
them.
Personal freedom enters there.
Well, look at the mandatory seatbelt bill in New York State.
And also, let's look at it in Texas when we get through.
After that was passed, New York State immediately had an increase in the compliance, in the wearing of a seatbelt. It went up from 15% on the average up to 70%, which is a substantial indication that voluntary compliance plays a major role. And since then, of course, in January of 1985, they had a 37% reduction in automobile fatalities compared to the same period in 1984. So,
you think it would catch hold eventually?
Oh,
open
absolutely.
Container law.
Absolutely. Open container will, as well as the mandatory seatbelt.
And then what about the making the legal age for drinking, moving it up to 21?
Well, the sad fact is that the 19 and 20-year-olds make up about 5% of the licensed drivers, but they're involved as drivers in 11% of the fatal accidents, and most of those are alcohol-related.
Well, did you wear your seatbelt driving over here to the studio?
Absolutely.
Jim has made a believer out of me and some other people, I think, on this program. You were made a believer, as you've told me several times on the show, by your children.
That's correct.
Tell us about seatbelts. Why do you like seatbelts? And do you like them better than airbags or what?
Well, I think airbags are the ultimate, especially when they're used with seatbelts. But in the meantime, I think we have an opportunity to dramatically increase the utilization of seatbelts. And if you do wear a seatbelt, in most accidents, you can be a survivor. You won't be if you're driving 100 miles an hour and run into a brick wall. Nothing would save you under those circumstances. But in most of the accidents that occur every day, you can be a survivor if you wear a seatbelt.
Does it worry you that the bill, as it's drawn at the moment in Texas, does not require seatbelts for the passengers in the rear seats?
Well, I think you have a little more safety in the rear seat, and I think everything is sort of incremental. I think that, one, if you take care of the driver and the front seat passenger, you're taking care of most of the instances where people are driving in motor vehicles.
Of course, we do have in place the child restraint law for children up to 4.
That's right.
And, of course, that means that children over 4 are required, would be required, to be strapped in, right, if the law passes in Texas.
That's right.
And, of course, their responsibility would not, the responsibility, should they be nabbed, so to speak, would fall on an adult, I think, on a child up to 14.
Up to 14.
Yes.
And this is an area, again, of course, where people say it's up to me to decide whether I want to protect myself by wearing a seatbelt. But if you heard the testimony from the State Rehabilitation Commission about millions of dollars every year spent on individuals that are permanent cripples as a result of accidents where they were not using seatbelts, the state does have an interest because there is an ultimate cost to the taxpayers of this state when people do not wear seatbelts and suffer injuries, and the state must take over their medical coverage.
Does it worry you that the bill as now drawn in Texas actually does not meet the Department of Transportation standards? It does not do anything to stave off their requiring seatbelts in 1989 the way it's drawn because of a clause in there dealing with mitigating, dealing with seatbelts as a mitigating factor in compensation cases.
Well, as I indicated, I think the ultimate safety factor is the utilization of airbags with seatbelts. But
when you say seatbelts, you don't mean just around the waist, you mean the shoulder harnesses,
oh, yeah.
of course.
But the thing that we look at from a safety standpoint is that the seatbelt by themselves, they're already available in the vehicle. There's no extra cost to the owner of a motor vehicle because they are already installed. That would save so many lives. We estimate about 1,200 lives a year in Texas would be saved if 100% of the people use seatbelts.
Well, I need to have you go to the physics of the thing right quick, then we have other topics to talk about. But why do seatbelts work so well, or why do we need seatbelts in a collision of a moving vehicle?
Well, the main reason is that if you go to any junkyard, you can tell that in the most severe accidents, the passenger compartment is usually intact. And the seatbelt restrains you, holds you in the passenger compartment. One, it keeps you from hitting other objects in the car.
You're going as fast as your car. Your car might stop, but you keep going if you don't have a seatbelt.
That's right. And you hit the steering wheel or you hit the dashboard or the windshield. But even more importantly, if you hit something and the doors spring open and you're thrown out of the car will generally roll in the same direction you're going, roll over you, and kill you or throw you into some other object. So the whole purpose of it is to keep you in an intact portion of the vehicle, which is the passenger compartment.
The legislature right now is looking at the wiretap bill, which has been in place, but which might self-destruct if not reenacted. What is your feeling, what is your finding about the utility of the wiretap bill in Texas thus far?
Well, we've had the wiretap bill now for 3 years since we utilized it the first occasion.
Now, this is can only be utilized under the law in Texas in narcotic cases.
That's right. In primarily drug traffickers, major trafficking cases, it requires an order by a district judge who's been approved to issue those orders. The prosecutor has to approve it. They can't just be installed on the whim of a police agency like the department. It's very tightly controlled, the most strictly controlled of any state in the United States, and it's been highly successful. We've used it to break up major methamphetamine manufacturing operations, cocaine operations, heroin, marijuana. The full gamut of major drug traffickers have been caught as a result of the utilization of the wiretap. And there have been no complaints. There have been no abuses. We haven't lost a motion before the court.
Civil Liberties Union complains a lot.
Oh, but I'm talking about complaints, specific complaints concerning misuse of the wiretap. The Civil Liberties Union complains on the basis that what if the police abuse this technique? What they should be looking at is the real world, what is happening around us. Look at the civil rights that are being violated by the drug traffickers and by those individuals who commit a wide host of crimes in order to get money to purchase drugs.
Speaking of the real world, can you give any, well, by the way, before I go to that, what about the real world on Capitol Hill regarding the chances of a wiretap bill being enacted this time? In other words, continued.
I feel certain the authority will be granted because the wiretaps have proven to be beneficial. They've done just what they were set out to do. There have been no abuses, and it's already passed the House without any changes and will soon be coming up in the Senate.
What I was going to ask you about, speaking of the real world, is your feeling as to the incursion of crime, organized or otherwise, in Texas as our population explodes?
Well, there's always a possibility of that. Organized crime, of course, when we talk about it, basically we're talking about the La Casa Nostra, or the structured major 26 families in the United States, and there are 3,000 associates dealing with your major organized crime. We have organized crime in Texas of the drug traffickers, or meeting a definition, a broad definition of 5 or more people engaged in a continuing criminal operation.
Well, would you say the mafia's in Texas?
No,
Organized?
we have no evidence at the present time that any major organized crime family, the mafia, is headquartered in Texas. We have seen investments in Texas. They bought hotels, motels, pizza parlors, different businesses like that. But thus far, their investments have appeared to be legal investments, even though the money may have been acquired illegally.
You used to be with the FBI. What is your reaction to the seemingly greatly increased activity of federal authorities in this country regarding crime and the mafia, or drug trafficking in particular, and the mafia in general?
Well, the FBI has been very active in organized crime investigations.
Drug enforcement agencies.
That's right. It's been one of the primary priorities of the FBI. And, of course, the unfortunate part is that they, over the years, have taken out the leadership, and it's been quickly supplanted. Now, then, as a result of coordinated raids around the country, we're hopeful that the subordinates will be hesitant about taking over the lead role, because they would immediately be targeted for investigation.
I'm going to shoot you a few quick ones out. Your time is quickly fleeting here. Were you surprised that the pari-mutuel betting bill went down in its first flurry in the Texas legislature?
No, I'd heard shortly before the bill came up for a vote that there has been quite a bit of factionalism developing concerning some of the minority interests and some of the other interests in the bill, and that they couldn't get their act together, and that it was likely to go down in defeat.
Well, do you think that pari-mutuel betting is dead in the Texas legislature this session?
I don't think it's dead yet. I think there's a strong interest in pari-mutuel betting. It can't come up in the House, of course, without a bill coming over from the Senate, and the Lieutenant Governor has indicated that in one news article I read that in view of the decisive defeat in the House, he didn't see any need to consider it in the Senate. But if the coalitions ever get together, they will make a run for it.
Sorry, our time is gone. Colonel Jim Adams, Director of the Texas Department of Public Safety, thank you very much for being with us. Join us here on Capital I again next week. See you then.
Capital I is a nonpartisan, nonprofit educational project owned and operated by Public Information Corporation, 718 Brown Building, Austin, Texas. Capital I has been on Texas radio and television stations continuously since 1969. It is supported by the general public through tax-deductible contributions and by foundation grants.
What's the news at City Hall this week? You'll know as soon as it happens if you watch the San Antonio City Council live each Thursday at 1 p.m. on Rogers Cablesystems Channel 5. Become informed about the decisions being made about San Antonio and your district. The agenda is set. Now watch it live. That's the San Antonio City Council each Thursday at 1 p.m. exclusively on Rogers Cablesystems